For a devotional for this Wednesday, I wanted to share a couple of things with you from the book of Romans, chapter 8. I recognize that this is a big chapter. It's always been interesting to me that the Apostle Paul gave to the church these great chunks of theology to a group of people that basically were slaves. They were not particularly educated people, but the depth of the teaching and of the theology is so deep that it's amazing to me that that it would still be that the early church would understand and begin to appreciate what Paul is saying. However, in Romans chapter 8, chapter 1, the Apostle Paul says that we are no longer under condemnation. The condemnation for those who are in Christ. There are a lot of people who would want to say that they're not under condemnation, but they fail to recognize that it's only in Christ that we are no longer under condemnation. We discover that the fact that we are not under condemnation is only because of the sovereign grace of God. He alone is the one who can purge from us the sin that we have. The whole concept of condemnation is a legal term, and it means literally to be declared not guilty. And so the Apostle Paul is saying it's only in Christ that we are free, that we are no longer under condemnation. I really appreciate Wesley's great hymn, "And Can It Be?" I'm not going to sing it for you, but I will give to you the last verse. Wesley writes, "No condemnation now I dread. Jesus and all in him is mine. Alive in him my living head, and clothed in righteousness above divine. Behold, I approach the eternal throne and claim the crown by Christ alone." Well, the Apostle Paul goes on from chapter 1, verse 3, and this is where I'd like to spend some time in chapter 31 to 39. In chapter 39, he writes, "What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us?" The if there is not a gift, not an if of doubt. If God is for us, and then again, maybe he's not. The if there is a certainty. It could be translated, since or because God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him up for us all. In verse 32, the Apostle Paul writes that the reason we can say that we are no longer under condemnation, and that because of Christ, goes back to the great book of Exodus, chapter 22, in the story of Abraham and Isaac. And the Apostle Paul says that while God did not spare the son of Abraham and Isaac, he did not spare his own son, but he delivered us up for us all. Who will bring any charge against us? The Apostle Paul writes that there are several questions that he asks. And the question there is really a rhetorical question, but we discover that it is God who has chosen us and is justified by us. In verse 34, who is he who condemns? Again, another rhetorical question. And the Apostle Paul says, in essence, no one can do that because of what Christ has done. In verse 35, who can separate us from the love of God who is in Christ Jesus? In verse 1, there is no condemnation. Here, no one can separate us from the love of God. The word to separate there is an interesting word. It means literally to tear apart or to separate, to bring apart. The ladies among the SNPs group will recognize what it means to separate a piece of clothing. And that's the idea. It rips it apart. The Apostle Paul says, who shall separate us from the love of God who is in Christ Jesus? And he writes several things. Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we face death all the day long. We are more than conquerors through him who loves us. Please note that we are more than conquerors, not through ourselves, but through the one who loved us. There are lots of people today, because of the plague, are saying that we just need to help our way through it. But as believers, we understand that it is through him who loves us that we will face through the constant concern that we have. For I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor the angels or demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any power, neither height nor depth, nor anyone else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus. So I say to you that whatever we are facing, there is no separation. We are separated together, but in Christ there is no separation at all. And while we may not be able to see each other, we are never separated because of Christ. I appreciate what the Gettys have written in one of their hymns, that great hymn, In Christ Alone. In Christ alone, my hope is found. He is my light, my strength, my song. This cornerstone, this solid ground, firm through the fiercest drought and storm. What heights of love, what depths of peace, when fears are stilled, when strivings cease. My comforter, my all in all, Here in the love of Christ, I stand. I trust that that is your testimony and an encouragement for you today.